When the identical black twins disclose their darkest DOJ secret, police officers stop and mock at them in court. Alana and Amara, twin sisters, had no idea that they would end themselves in trouble with the law. They had always been devoted students involved in the community and, most significantly, a lifeline to one another. However, they found themselves standing in a packed courtroom with their hearts racing on a cool autumn morning. Two arrogant policemen, who had detained them under questionable circumstances, stood across the aisle. Their smirks were filled with unnerving assurance. These officers had no idea that their darkest secret was being secretly revealed by the U.S. Department of Justice, on the direction of Attorney General Merrick Garland. And all would alter when that secret came to light. Amara Mitchell and Alana had always had the special twin bond. They were one other's shadows from an early age, completing each other's sentences and creating supportive relationships. They were notable for their scholastic excellence and unflinching optimism, despite growing up in a humble area in Hawthorne City, Mississippi. Their father, Leonard, taught history at the nearby high school, while their mother, Clarice, put in a lot of overtime as a social worker. The family, proud of their ancestry and committed to making a positive impact on the community, exemplified a quiet resilience. A sultry July evening saw a dramatic change in life. Amara and Alana had volunteered the day at a nearby youth program, where they assisted kids in honing their arithmetic and reading skills in preparation for the new school year. The two sisters, who were both in their early 20s, got into a playful fight about who would get to enjoy ice cream first. They chose a modest location next to the municipal park, which they knew was frequently bustling with happy people and families. But there was an odd tension in the air this evening. As they made their way to their vehicle, a police cruiser slowly followed them. Initially, neither sister thought much about it. Police were frequently present in Hawthorne City, and they were generally courteous if aloof. However, the cruiser's two white cops' pointed stares made them uneasy for some reason. The police car pulled alongside after circling them twice. Officer Darren Walters said, "Good evening," as he got out of the car. Officer Brent Kilroy, his partner, was still sitting there looking around. Walters' expression was unreadable as he casually placed a hand on his holster. "Good evening, officer," Amara said, attempting to maintain a steady tone. Standing behind her, Alana became agitated at witnessing Walters' easy yet prepared posture. "Are we able to assist you?" Alana inquired courteously. Walters did not respond right away. He passed by them, his gaze straying from Amara's braided hair to Alana's footwear, as if searching for something, anything, that would give him reason to be angry. "Would you mind showing me some ID?" he finally inquired. Despite the suddenness of the request and the fact that neither sister could come up with a good explanation, they complied. Amara pulled her driver's license out of a back pocket, while Alana fumbled it out of her tiny purse. After looking at both IDs, Walters stopped. Walters responded hazily that there had been a report of strange activity close to the park. "Both of you meet the criteria." Amara felt her heart race. She had heard tales of acquaintances and friends being stopped because they fit a general description. She made herself stay composed. "Officer, what kind of suspicious activity?" Walters grinned. "You don't ask the questions, we do." Kilroy got out of the cruiser at that point and started to approach them. He raised his eyebrows in faux wonder and smiled sarcastically. "Are there any weapons on you women that we should be aware of?" Without trying to conceal the implication, he questioned. Alana tightened her jaw. "No, of course not." Walters said, "We want to search your car," indicating the sisters' old sedan parked a short distance away. The sisters were aware that, in most cases, they may decline a search if there was no reasonable suspicion. However, they were also aware of the power dynamics at work. They were cornered on an empty stretch close to the park by two white officers who were condescending. Escalation was a serious risk. Any disrespectful gesture or dispute could have disastrous consequences. Alana reluctantly shrugged. "All right," she whispered softly, looking at Amara, who nodded resignedly. The hunt started. The sisters' jackets and volunteer leaflets were thrown aside as Walters and Kilroy searched the trunk and opened each door. After a few minutes, Walters abruptly displayed a tiny plastic bag that neither sister had ever seen. Something that appeared to be powder was within. He gave a victorious grin. Walters said, "Look what we have here. Lady's possession of a controlled drug. Time seems to stop." A broken whisper was Amara's voice. "We've never seen that before, so it's not ours." Her remarks were ignored. With a theatrical flourish, Kilroy read them their rights and promptly put them under arrest. It was like walking through a tunnel of fear to get to the cruiser. Some neighbors looked out of windows with worry, while others displayed the same arrogant fascination as the police officers. It all happened too quickly for Alana and Amara. Their anxieties reached unthinkable heights. Their lives had been devoted to doing things correctly. They learned, they volunteered, and they avoided problems. They were cuffed, put in the back of a police cruiser, and given a criminal label in the blink of an eye. They had no idea that this was only the beginning. In an instant, the evidence against them would be piled high, and before long, they would be in a courtroom, the object of patronizing jeering. Even though the situation seemed dire, forces outside of this tiny Mississippi town were silently paying attention and getting ready to step in ways that nobody could have predicted. The walls of the chilly cell were painted a fading beige. Within the Hawthorne City Police Station, Alana and Amara were held in a holding area. Hard shadows swept the room as an unwelcoming fluorescent light buzzed overhead. With their hearts still pounding from the sudden arrest, the sisters looked at one another anxiously. They were left to wait after being robbed of their phones, purses, possessions, and self-respect. It felt like time was moving slowly in that musty jail. After a while, Sergeant Miriam Foley, an officer they had never seen before, entered with a clipboard. Her severe face reminded Alana of a rigid principal, and she was middle-aged. Nevertheless, Foley's eyes were nicer than Walters and Kilroy. Without looking them in the eye, she asked a series of questions about their residences, next of kin, and health issues. Her speech did not, however, have the abrasive quality that had characterized their first encounter with the arresting cops. "Do you have any allergies?" With her pen poised over the clipboard, Foley asked. Amara cleared her throat. "Not at all." Foley wrote down something. She closed her folder and said, "Your bail hearing will be scheduled as soon as possible. However, it may not be tonight due to the seriousness of the charges." "Sev, serious?" Alana said without thinking. "We have no idea exactly what we are being accused of. We didn't own the medications." Foley's gaze wavered. There was an uncomfortable moment as she let out a soft breath and walked away without saying anything more. Amara sank to a bench and sucked out a shuddering breath. She hugged herself and whispered, "They planted that bag, Alana. I have no doubt about it. But how can we demonstrate it?" Alana fell next to her twin. "We need to call our parents. A lawyer who will believe us is what we need. Can't this stand up in court?" But her gut nodded with fear. She was aware that the legal system could be anything but fair in many tiny communities. They have heard horrifying tales of forced confessions or fabricated evidence railroading young black individuals. Their reality now was that eerie possibility. The hours passed slowly. An officer eventually arrived to take them individually to separate interrogation rooms. It was Alana's turn first. In the center of a small room with dull walls and a single overhead light were a table and 2 seats. Officer Walters was seated on the other side of the table, his sneer tight-lipped. After signaling Alana to take a seat, he crossed his arms and stood up. "Would you mind sharing the location of that small stockpile in your trunk with me, Alana?" Alana made an effort to control her breathing. "It's not mine, I told you. Tonight, we were volunteering." Walters waved his hand dismissively. "Correct. Good gals, you two are spotless. All of them say that. However, I have work to do. You know, earlier we had an anonymous report about 2 women who appeared to be dealing in the park. I just discovered drugs in your trunk. How am I meant to overlook that?" Alana felt the heat surge to her face. Her voice trembled as she leaned forward. "What tip you received is irrelevant to me. It's untrue. Throughout our lives, we have never dealt narcotics. They have never even been touched by us." Walters pretended to be disappointed by clicking his tongue. "The story can be saved for court. Unless," he said, looking at her with a glimmer of predatory intentness, "unless you're prepared to assist. Work together?" Her eyes narrowed as she repeated. He gave a shrug. I might suggest a bargain to the district attorney if you tell me who is actually responsible. Perhaps you give me some larger fish. Can relieve some of the tension between you and your sister." His voice was calculated and honeyed. Alana felt her heart pound. She was well aware of his attempts to create a situation where they would blame someone else in order to escape responsibility. However, that would be a falsehood or perjury. Furthermore, there was no one to blame. All of this was a lie, a ploy to boost police numbers, or perhaps something more sinister. She trembled when she spoke. "I don't know what you're discussing." Walter's expression grew stern. "So you want to play it that way? All right." After getting up, he picked up the paperwork from the desk and proceeded to the door. "When the charges are formally filed, we'll see how well you and your sister get along in jail." Alana's stomach turned over with fear as he left her alone. She was escorted back to the holding cell by an officer a few minutes later. A few minutes later, Amara was brought back with red and teary eyes. Both were afraid of what they would do next, but neither wanted to discuss what had been stated. Just before daybreak, the first glimmer of optimism appeared. Their parents had come to the station with Nina Barnes, a local lawyer. She was a small woman with short hair and a strong temper who insisted on Alana and Amara being granted a hearing to argue for bail right away. After considerable back and forth, the sisters were finally informed that they would be seeing a judge that afternoon. Alana drooped in a corner of the jail, her eyelids tugged by fatigue. She wanted fervently that this was all a nightmare from which she could awaken. Squeezing her hand, Amara's fingers interlocked as they had when they were little and afraid of thunder. They were unaware that the impending storm would cause far more damage than any thunderclap. However, their unity and the possibility that someone outside of this tiny, tainted bubble may be observing provided any comfort. Alana and Amara emerged from the police transport vehicle onto the weathered steps of the Hawthorne City Courthouse as the afternoon sun poured down. Onlookers who knew the twins from their academic honors or charity activities murmured as their hands were shackled in front of them. Despite the fear that weighed on every step, the sisters maintained their composure. Old fans whirled languidly overhead, scarcely moving the thick heat in the courthouse. Their parents waited in a tiny conference room, their hands shaking and their eyes worried, while their lawyer, Nina Barnes, led the way. With a cracked voice, Leonard Mitchell clasped his daughter's shoulders and promised them that they would survive. "Have faith," Clarice said, wiping away their tears. The lawyer, Nina, then hurried them through the last preparations, explaining the bail procedure and advising them to maintain composure no matter what was said or done. They came into the courtroom a few moments later. The weight of the curious citizens, reporters, and observers made the wooden benches creak. Judge Albert Cohen, a robust guy, served as the county judge and sat in a high seat. Officers Walters and Kilroy were smirking and whispering to each other as they leaned comfortably against a wall across the aisle. There was a noticeable silence in the room when Alana and Amara were instructed to come to the stand. Nina made a succinct case for granting bail. The twins were obviously not flight threats, had clean backgrounds, and were well connected in the community. The assistant district attorney, however, stood and read from a pile of documents that stated the sisters were caught in possession of a large amount of a controlled narcotic, so posing a risk to public safety. "We have a suspected drug trafficking case here," the ADA said. "To safeguard our community, the law must act decisively." Walters chuckled softly but loudly enough for Alana to hear from the rear of the courtroom. Kilroy snorted mockingly after him. It was an insult that cut through the already heated atmosphere, a moment of mutual disrespect. Alana got a burn on her cheeks. Her heart pounded with embarrassment and indignation. They were making fun of her, Amara, and the unfairness of it all. A surge of rage threatened to overtake her, but she recalled Nina's counsel to maintain composure and be kind. She inhaled to regain her composure. Judge Cohen looked through his glasses. "Is there anything the defense can say to refute these allegations of a bigger trafficking organization, Miss Barnes?" Nina put her hands together. "Your Honor, indeed. My clients adamantly deny any connection to drugs. They have solid proof of where they were before being taken into custody. Recorded hours spent volunteering in the neighborhood youth center. We want the court to either set a fair bond amount or release them on their own recognizance." As if in contemplation, the judge paused and quietly tapped his gavel against his desk. "Bail is granted after a beat, but I will set it at a relatively high amount given the seriousness of the charges," he stated. After some financial wrangling, he sketched a figure that was exorbitant but still within the Mitchells' reach. There was a collective sigh of relief from their parents, Alana and Amara. Nina gave a rigid nod. "Your Honor, thank you." However, as they turned to go, Walters and Kilroy's mocking laughter reverberated. The officers whispered to each other that wealthy girls will receive what is rightfully theirs. Alana balled her fists. She could tell Amara was just as angry. The courtroom was not the end of the day's experience. The sisters and their parents were pounded by local press reporters outside on the courthouse steps as soon as the hearing concluded. The cameras flashed. They were shoved with microphones. They were bombarded with inquiries about the alleged narcotics, the seriousness of the allegations, and the family's response. Words like conspiracy and trafficking reverberated menacingly. Nina skillfully handled the media frenzy, announcing her innocence in a succinct statement and cautioning the public against drawing hasty judgments. "Do you think the police fabricated evidence?" A fearless reporter pushed a microphone in Alana's direction and inquired. Nina interrupted her as she opened her lips to say, "We are looking into this on our own. No more comments will be made at this time." A family friend drove them from the courthouse to a tiny diner down the street when they found a waiting automobile. They both ordered something comforting, like a warm dinner or a cup of tea or coffee, as they sank into a booth, exhausted and emotionally raw. Alana could barely concentrate on anything beyond the fear circling in her thoughts as the overhead television blared the midday news. Amara gripped a cup of steaming tea and whispered, "This can't be real. Before all of this, we were volunteering for hours. That's proof, isn't it?" Nina gave a nod. "I'm going to compile all of the evidence, including staff sign-in logs, security footage, and testimonies from the children you were teaching. We will not allow them to bury you beneath unfounded accusations." Clarice and Leonard made an effort to grin encouragingly, but their faces were deeply scarred by concern. The twins saw how much this affected their parents. Making bail was a major burden on already limited funds, and that was only the first obstacle. In addition to the emotional toll of defending against an unfair accusation, legal bills would be an enormous hardship. Amara gazed out the window of the diner. She briefly believed she saw Officer Kilroy's face in the passenger seat of a police vehicle as it passed slowly, looking down at her. She took a deep breath. "They seem to be observing us," she said. Nina looked at it briefly. "Let them observe. We have nothing to conceal. Conversely, She hesitated, picking her words wisely. "There may be an ongoing Department of Justice inquiry of specific Mississippi police departments, based on what I've heard through back channels, such as racial profiling and corruption." Leonard raised his eyebrows and leaned forward. "Really? Have they brought up Hawthorne City Police specifically?" Nina said, "I don't have confirmation, but I suspect that if they dig deep, these officers, Walters and Kilroy in particular, may be on someone's radar." A tiny glimmer of optimism was ignited in the group by her comments. Perhaps Alana and Amara's situation might attract federal notice if the DOJ was looking into local police misbehavior. The sisters looked at each other. The sting of being made fun of in court by the same men who had set them up was still present. Perhaps, however, their reckoning day would arrive sooner rather than later. But the reality was terrible for the moment. A neighborhood rife with gossip, an impending arraignment, and possible felony charges. They could still hear the cops laughing. However, they decided that no amount of jeering or threats could keep the truth hidden as they walked hand in hand out of the diner into the late afternoon sun. The wheels of justice had started to turn somewhere far above the corrupt apparatus of local law enforcement. The sisters anticipated that the system that permitted those cops to mock them in court would soon be completely upended. The Mitchell home became a temporary legal battleground during the ensuing weeks. The dining room table was covered in notes and files. A bulletin board with phone call logs and testimony outlines attached to it. Alana and Amara talked to Nina Barnes for hours about their whole day before the arrest, including the type of ice cream they intended to purchase. Although exhausting, the thoroughness was essential. Walters and Kilroy had built a false narrative, and every little detail might hold the secret. Nevertheless, despite their careful planning, an unseen danger appeared to be lurking. The community's friends were split. Some publicly backed the sisters, while others became aloof due to rumors or apprehension about getting into trouble with the law. Clarice was informed in a whisper one afternoon by an old neighbor that the family was the subject of malicious inquiries, badge-wielding individuals who didn't appear to be actual detectives. A hastily typed note was attached to Leonard's car's windshield one day. "You have no idea who you are dealing with, so stop pressing." Alana and Amara made an effort to be positive despite the fear that was beginning to consume their life. They held on to little rituals, such as running together in the morning, preparing dinner with their parents, and returning to the youth center to volunteer as soon as they were permitted. They had to demonstrate to themselves and the rest of the world that they would not be intimidated. The twins, who were both enrolled in community college classes, were wrapping up an online study session when the family phone called late one evening. In the kitchen, Clarice responded, her voice floating upward. There was a pause, followed by the sound of her gasping. Clarice was holding the phone with tears glimmering in her eyes when Alana and Amara hurried down. Clarice said, her voice shaking with cautious enthusiasm, "That was someone from the Department of Justice. They wish to meet with you and are aware of your case." Over the phone, they indicated a more thorough inquiry, but did not provide specifics. She looked to Leonard, who put a soothing hand on his wife's shoulder and nodded. Two officers showed up at the Mitchell residence the following afternoon. The first identified herself as FBI Special Agent Carla Ruiz, who was part of a DOJ task force looking into police misconduct. The other was Daniel Berger, a Civil Rights Division Assistant U.S. Attorney. To prove they were who they said they were, both displayed their credentials. They were courteous yet serious. Agent Ruiz took a seat in the living room and looked around. Her look was determined as she met Alana's and Amara's eyes. "Let me start by expressing my regret for everything you have endured. If you don't mind, we'd like to ask you some questions." After exchanging quick looks, the sisters nodded. The agents jumped right into business, respectfully declining the coffee offer from Leonard and Clarice. They inquired about the arrest, the search's specifics, the conduct of Walters and Kilroy, and the whole course of events that evening. Ruiz listened carefully as Berger hammered away at a laptop, occasionally asking for further details. Berger shut down his computer at the conclusion of the interview. He gently cautioned, "We suspect this fits a pattern we've seen in certain Mississippi police departments, but we can't promise immediate relief. Unaccounted for narcotics busts, including people with no past histories, racial profiling, and evidence that has been fabricated. We think your testimony could be very important as we build a federal case." Alana felt a mixture of fear and hope. "So, they may finally be held accountable?" she inquired, nearly terrified of being overly hopeful. Ruiz and Berger looked at each other. "Serious federal charges may be brought against individuals guilty if we find a pattern of civil rights breaches. However, you should also know that the path ahead will not be easy. Because of the pervasive corruption, these officers might not be easily removed." The Mitchells looked at each other resolutely. They were joined for the interview by Nina Barnes, who raised her voice. "They won't scare us into keeping quiet. It's already gone too far." With a vow to stay in contact, the agents departed. Alana and Amara experienced a sense of vindication for the first time since the ordeal started. It felt like part of a weight had been removed. Over the course of the following few days, Alana and Amara received additional calls from the DOJ, more visits, and an official request to appear before a grand jury if necessary. The seeds were being sown for a more extensive probe. However, there were also disturbing changes. Alana saw a black automobile sitting at the end of their block late one night when she was gazing out her bedroom window. The engine hums softly, and the headlights are off. It finally withdrew after sitting there for over an hour. Amara once had a string of anonymous calls that stopped as soon as she responded. Nina reassured them that it was probably harassment to get them not to cooperate with federal agents. Then there were rumors of Kilroy and Walters. There were rumors that they were part of a covert group of policemen who planted narcotics on innocent people, primarily young black men and women, in order to increase departmental numbers. According to some, these officers were shielded by superiors and allowed carte blanche to plan busts in order to gain promotions or departmental recognition. Walters and Kilroy had far more to conceal than a single planted bag of powder, if the rumor mill was right. The sisters were in their shared bedroom one evening, quietly contemplating what to do next. They committed to giving their full cooperation if the DOJ asked them to testify or make additional remarks. Their resolution blazed hotter, but their worries still gnawed at the edges. "We must speak up," Amara stated resolutely, "for all those they have wronged, not just us." Alana squeezed her sister's hand and nodded. They recalled the laughing in the courtroom that had ridiculed their innocence at their darkest hours. It strengthened their nerves and gave them energy, because they were fighting for more than simply their independence. In order to spare more innocent people from going through the same ordeal, they were striving to expose a corrupt system. They had no idea that when the DOJ revealed the corrupt layers of those two racist police officers' secrets, their laughing would finally transform into desperate entreaties. Because Walters and Kilroy did, in fact, have a secret skeleton. One so sinister that it endangered not just their badges, but the very basis of the police force that protected them. The first domino fell in the middle of August. 2 Hawthorne City officers have been suspended until an internal affairs investigation is conducted, according to local news outlets. Although Walters and Kilroy were not named in the report at first, the rumor mill went into overdrive, and it became evident who was being investigated within hours. The local channel showed shaky video of a press conference outside the Hawthorne City Police Department, which Alana and Amara watched from their living room. Colonel Harold March, the inflexible police chief, read a prepared statement with reluctance. "2 of our policemen are the targets of misbehavior claims. We urge the public to wait for the investigation's findings before making any judgments, even though the department will not accept any misconduct." March was forceful yet evasive in his tone. He hurried back inside the building without answering any questions. After then, the camera moved to a sea of reporters who were speculating about the charge's gravity and whether they had anything to do with the federal inquiry that was allegedly taking on behind closed doors. Nina Barnes gripped her phone in the Mitchell residence, looking through messages and calls from legal connections. With every update, Walters and Kilroy's situation became more incriminating. With a hint of enthusiasm, but also caution, Nina whispered, "It appears that they have been involved in the planting of evidence in at least 3 separate arrests. If that's the case, a distinct pattern is beginning to emerge." The Department of Justice formally announced a civil rights investigation into the Hawthorne City Police Department a few days later. The statement carried weight, citing numerous credible complaints of racial bias, evidence tampering, and possible constitutional rights violations, even though no names were mentioned. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, had approved the investigation himself. Putting a little Mississippi town under the scrutiny of the highest federal legal authority was a historic step. Kilroy and Walters, meanwhile, made an effort to blend in. Although they were not arrested, they were essentially relieved of their responsibilities. Still, although it quickly became apparent that the department didn't want them in the building at all, they were restricted to administrative duties. Local radio hosts conjectured that the couple had contacted a renowned Jackson law firm for legal assistance. They might try to avoid town, others muttered. The strange appearance of unidentified autos outside the Mitchell home grew more intense along with the governmental scrutiny. Alana was positive she saw Walter's silhouette in a passing car one night. Another day, Clarice claimed to have heard footsteps in the backyard, but Leonard used a flashlight to search and discovered no one. Concerned, Nina proposed adding security cameras. The rumors that started to circulate regarding Walters and Kilroy's private life were even more concerning. Darnell Thompson, a man who had formerly worked at a local car dealership, came up to Nina and told her a startling story. He said that in order to fabricate drug busts, Walters had pressured him into putting concealed compartments in cars. Another woman, a teacher from a nearby county, described a terrifying traffic stop in which Kilroy threatened to arrest her if she did not provide him with the name of a drug user. After refusing, the teacher was temporarily arrested before being unjustly released. Up until now, she had been afraid to talk about it. Every narrative undermined the appearance of legitimacy surrounding these police and strengthened the belief that their coordinated drug arrests were part of a larger, darker scheme to extort innocent people, take property, or transfer money. The phone rang late one afternoon as Alana, Amara, and Nina were going over legal documents. Clarice responded, listening with a pallid expression. She hung up after a tense minute and faced the others. She said, her eyes wide, that was the assistant U.S. attorney. They discovered a significant connection between Walters and Kilroy, as well as intentional targeting. They would like both of you to visit tomorrow in order to submit additional statements. Nina raised her eyebrows with cautious hope. We might finally get the break we've been hoping for. Agent Ruiz and Daniel Berger met the twins and Nina when they arrived at a modest federal building in Jackson, Mississippi, the following day. After being led to a safe meeting room, they discovered a mountain of papers arranged on a long table. Grainy surveillance photos, transcripts, and even photographs. There was a sense of gravity. Berger gestured toward a document. We have discovered a pattern in the arrests of Kilroy and Walters. Approximately 90% of their significant drug busts involve individuals of color. We use forensics, ballistics, and even bank data to cross-check these arrests. The evidence seems to have been either falsified or inconclusive in several cases. Alana's heartbeat accelerated. They acted so blatantly. For what length of time did they think they would get away with it? With a hint of annoyance in her voice, Agent Ruiz said, ecosystems in small towns can be exclusive. A small group of powerful people can defend one another. Individuals who attempted to speak up were too afraid. However, the wall of silence has been broken by your case and others who have come forward. She looked at more pictures. Trophy images of their alleged busts, receipts for confiscated property, and boastful text messages were all retained by Walters and Kilroy. They even exchanged images of the individuals they had arrested, frequently making fun of them with racist or insulting remarks. Alana felt sick to her stomach at the realization. She took a deep breath. What comes next, then? Berger and Ruiz looked at each other. In our opinion, we have sufficient proof to file federal civil rights charges against them. But those two aren't the only goals we have in mind. Higher authorities may be involved in this plot. We want to be certain that the entire enterprise is dismantled. Nina touched Amara's shoulder in a comforting manner. That would also demonstrate that the evidence against you was fabricated, which would significantly improve our defense in your case. Agent Ruiz gave a nod. That's right. Additionally, it will be the final nail in the coffin for any local charges against you if we can link the dots back to the evening of your arrest. As the gathering came to an end, hope mixed with a sobering realization of the darkness they were up against. It became increasingly evident as the DOJ's investigation progressed that Walters and Kilroy's misconduct stretched years and left a path of broken lives in their wake. However, the weight of federal law, along with the laughter that once plagued Alana and Amara in the courtroom, may soon return to haunt the offenders. Nevertheless, the sisters were aware that victory would not be free. They were targeted because of their public position. Every fresh disclosure ran the possibility of increased threats and retaliatory actions from those who didn't want the truth to be known. However, the hope of justice and exoneration kept them going. That day, they had a new purpose when they exited the federal building. They also realized that the most powerful remedy for corruption was truth, even though they were still afraid. And that truth was on their side, becoming more powerful with each new revelation and each toppled domino. Alana and Amara attempted to keep things somewhat regular during the whirlwind of disclosures by volunteering at the youth center, taking online classes, and helping out around the house. However, their lives were now uncomfortably public, and reporters would sometimes knock on their home to ask for exclusive interviews. Nina suggested that they restrict their interactions with the media in order to avoid saying something that can be misconstrued or used against them. But one evening, the Mitchell residence had an unexpected visitor. The man was in his late 30s, with slightly unkempt hair and a wrinkled suit. He identified himself as Gerald Jerry McClellan, a reporter with the Clarion Ledger, a Jackson-based daily that is one of the bigger in Mississippi. Standing on the porch as the sisters and their parents listened nervously, he stated, "I've been investigating police corruption in Hawthorne City for months. I have documents that give a very bad picture of Walters and Kilroy, including court transcripts, depositions, and internal memoranda. I need your assistance, but I believe your tale may hold the secret to opening this up." Alana and Amara looked at each other doubtfully. They were about to reply when Clarice intervened. With a stern yet courteous tone, she stated, "We have legal counsel. We can't just stand on the porch and make remarks." Jerry nodded with a sense of comprehension. He reached into his pocket and took out a business card. "I understand. I'm not trying to surprise you. Just give your lawyer my card, please. On or off the record, I think it would help if you have any knowledge to contribute." Gerald McClellan, investigative journalist, was listed on the card, along with his contact information. Clarice regarded it warily. They gathered in the living room after he went, unsure of the danger. When told, Nina advised caution. There were differences in journalistic integrity, and a single incorrect quote may lead to legal issues. She was fascinated, however, by McClellan's reference to internal memos, particularly if they supported the DOJ's conclusions. Old memories started to come back to the twins as they considered the benefits and drawbacks of talking to the media. A knock on the door a few days later brought in another surprise visitor. Alana and Amara's childhood friend Carmen Reed had moved away after high school. Her stance was stiff as she timidly walked into the living room. She said, "As soon as I heard, I came. I'd like to share something with you." Carmen clarified that Walters and Kilroy had arrested her cousin Marcus years prior on identical suspicious charges of drug use. Although Marcus had only received a brief sentence, the incident damaged his chances of graduating from college and permanently stained his record. Carmen acknowledged that her family had been too silent out of fear of reprisals or more arrests. Carmen remarked, tears welling up in her eyes, "Marcus kept telling me he was innocent. He said the drugs were planted by the police. At first, we didn't believe him. I recognize now that he was telling the truth, given what you're going through." Alana felt her heart sink. She knew how serious that worry was. "Is your cousin open to talking to the DOJ?" Softly, she inquired. Carmen gave an unsure shrug. "He is resentful and angry, but perhaps he will come forward if he realizes he is not alone." Nina, who joined them via the phone, asked them to urge Marcus to take the initiative. The case against Walters, Kilroy, and maybe other complicit cops is strengthened by the number of victims who testified. Indeed, the ghosts of the past were resurfacing and raising a unified voice for justice. Armed with fresh DOJ evidence, Nina filed applications in the local court in the ensuing weeks to have the accusations against Alana and Amara dropped. Tension was high as the hearing date approached. On social media, the twin supporters started organizing, denouncing corruption through local Facebook groups and hashtags. Many noted the twins' steadfast dedication to the community and their insistence that they would never use drugs. The twins were portrayed as troublemakers by a tiny but loud group in the city, some of whom had connections to the police. Racist comments were made by anonymous internet trolls who said the sisters were using their race as an excuse to avoid prosecution. In a brief interview with a local broadcaster, Officer Walters and Kilroy defended their innocence and branded the accusations fake news that was planned by anti-police activists. Then came the day that made all the difference. The Hawthorne City Police Department was one of several locations that the DOJ task team raided in a coordinated series of raids. Witnesses recounted the shocking event of federal agents snatching computer hard drives and files as they marched through the station. By evening, it was announced that Walters and Kilroy had been arrested by the federal government and charged with conspiracy, civil rights abuses, and evidence fabrication. Mississippi television screens broadcast the image of the two officers, shackled and surrounded by federal officials. The original courtroom scene, in which Walters and Kilroy had sneered at Alana and Amara, was reversed in a strange way. The faces were pale with fear, and this time there was no grinning. This was both a victory and a moment of grim insight for the Mitchell family. Beyond their own case, the twin sisters had set off a chain reaction. However, the legal proceedings were far from finished. As Alana and Amara's hearing drew near, The local prosecutor maintained the formal allegations against them in spite of the growing evidence in their favor. To be completely exonerated, a judge's decision would be required. Clarice looked to her daughters as they watched the television as the day's events unfolded in the silence of a late-night family get-together. "You took on a system that has been broken for far too long, and one day you'll look back on this and realize how strong you both were," she continued, her voice shaking with pride. Alana and Amara smiled quietly, remembering for a moment the chilly nights in jail, the humiliating laughs in court, the terror of ominous eyes outside their home, and the hope that the same men who had earlier made fun of them would soon be put on trial for their own crimes. The morning of Alana and Amara's hearing came like a thunderclap, and a group of supporters gathered outside the Hawthorne City Courthouse, holding signs that read justice for the Mitchell sisters and stop racial profiling. And that in itself felt like a step toward justice, not just for them, but for an entire community long plagued by the shadows of racist policing. There were a few counter-protesters milling around, but the atmosphere was clearly in the twins' favor. Reporters anticipating a big story lined the steps, cameras ready, and the courtroom was filled with an almost electric tension. As spectators crowded into the wooden benches, court officers attempted to keep the peace. Nina Barnes stood close to the defense table, leafing through a thick binder of motions and evidence, while Alana and Amara joined her, both tall and well-dressed. Judge Cohen, the same judge who had heard their bail hearing, took the bench, and they felt the gaze of the courtroom on them, some critical, some sympathetic, but all very interested. He looked across the room as he called the proceedings to order, and despite the national attention, he had a tired look on his face, as if he were preparing for the day's fight. The prosecutor, who appeared to be less confident than previously, stood up to speak. Before he could argue, Nina Barnes calmly listed the reasons: new evidence from the DOJ investigation, sworn statements from witnesses accusing the police of misconduct, and the federal indictments against officers Walters and Kilroy. He started by reciting the initial charges against Alana and Amara: possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Judge Cohen leaned forward, palms folded, as the prosecutor stumbled, insisting that the local case was still valid, but unable to ignore the flood of federal findings. "I need to hear a compelling argument from the prosecution as to why these charges should remain," he stated sharply, referring to the DOJ records that present a scathing image of widespread malfeasance. Unflinching, Nina produced a statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office, specifically naming Alana and Amara as victims of planted evidence, along with a subpoenaed set of text messages between Walters and Kilroy, which demonstrated that the officers had discussed pinning something on the twins to make an example of them. The prosecutor, obviously flustered, attempted to argue that local charges could stand alone and that the DOJ's investigation was still ongoing. As Nina read aloud one exchange, the courtroom became silent. "Walters, got 2 chicks. Kilroy, they'll fold easily if we find the right evidence. Very pretty, very smug. Yeah, let's teach them a lesson. Just a little powder for them to cry about." The crowd erupted in murmurs, and even Judge Cohen's normally composed face broke with surprise. Alana's heart raced, and when she heard Walters and Kilroy's heartless remarks, her gut twisted with rage, but it also stoked satisfaction that their deceit had finally been revealed. Judge Cohen went over the messages and took off his glasses. The supporters in the gallery let out a muffled shout. "I find this extremely concerning. Given the overwhelming evidence that the arresting officers acted with gross misconduct, I'm inclined to dismiss all charges against the defendants." With tears of appreciation and validation in their eyes, Alana took Amara's hand, and Nina put a supporting hand on Alana's shoulder, but the judge wasn't done. "Additionally, I anticipate a formal examination of every case handled by these cops. This case against the Mitchell sisters is dismissed with immediate effect." He focused his eyes on the prosecutor. The room exploded in cheers from their supporters as they left the courtroom free of these allegations, and I genuinely believe the legal system righted any wrongs done to them. Gavel down, a thunderous crack. The memory of the courtroom laughter all those weeks earlier became a tribute to their strength and the power of truth as Alana and Amara breathed together, the tension releasing from their bodies. Journalists rushed to them outside, cameras flashing, mics out, and Nina led the sisters swiftly to a small stage that a local activist group had set up. Alana steadied herself at the microphone, her pulse still pounding. "Today's dismissal is a relief," she said, her voice trembling a little. "But we're not just here to celebrate our victory. This is just the start of a much bigger battle for accountability. And we are here to draw attention to everyone who has been harmed by a system that permitted two dishonest policemen to fabricate evidence and ruin lives." Amara came forward. "We stand with those who continue to fight for their innocence. And we are grateful to everyone who had faith in us, spoke up, and helped uncover the truth." A new day dawned for the sisters as the sun shined overhead, the audience shouted, and camera shutters clicked like distant thunder. "We won't rest until justice is served for everyone." As they descended the courthouse steps, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, Alana noticed two familiar faces in orange jumpsuits being led in by federal marshals, Walters and Kilroy. This was the first time in weeks that they could breathe freely, free from the burden of unfounded accusations. For a brief moment, Alana and Kilroy's eyes met, and their once cocky faces were now hollowed out by fear. The laughing and cockiness had vanished, replaced by the somber awareness that their darkest secrets had been exposed. In that moment, she saw that the tide had completely shifted, and he hurriedly looked away, as if the sight of her was too much to handle. She felt no sympathy, only a strong feeling of karmic justice. After their stunning court triumph, Alana and Amara had to navigate a flood of public attention. The gavel had dropped, the days of mocking the innocent were done, and the laughter of racist cops had been muted by a truth far more powerful and far more enduring. Initially overwhelmed, they soon realized that their story had touched a nerve in the larger conversation about policing and racism in America. The sisters felt a responsibility to use their newfound platform wisely, but they also longed for the simple joys of normal life. Invitations came pouring in from local churches asking them to speak about social justice, from colleges asking them to address student groups, and even from media outlets hoping for exclusive interviews. The federal investigation into Hawthorne City Police Department continued, uncovering a web of corruption that implicated not only Walters and Kilroy, but also a few other officers and possibly higher-ranking individuals. They were free from bail restrictions, returning to volunteering at the youth center and attending classes in person without the constant threat of possible incarceration hanging over them. Their father, Leonard, was able to discuss future plans, such as attending the twins' graduation and taking a family vacation they had long put off. There were rumors that a new departmental leadership was emerging, with a federal monitor to oversee reforms. While some members of the community doubted that significant change could occur, others were encouraged. Agent Carla Ruiz returned to the Mitchell residence one sunny autumn afternoon with good news. "Your evidence and testimony are crucial. You will probably be asked to talk about your experience. The civil rights trial against Walters and Kilroy is scheduled for early next year," she continued. Considering how far they'd come since that horrific night of their incarceration, Alana and Amara were prepared, and no threat or intimidation could stop them now. "We'll be there," Alana replied firmly. Now that their immediate legal issues were resolved, Nina Barnes urged the twins to sue the city for damages, reputational harm, emotional distress, and legal fees. After giving it some thought, they agreed. Not out of greed, but out of principle. Because if the city was forced to pay, perhaps it would act as a financial incentive for reform. As the lawsuit gained even more attention, the family found themselves in the spotlight once more. And on a cool November night, they hosted a modest party in their backyard to celebrate a kind of independence party, where they were joined by new allies, neighbors, and close friends who shared potluck food and gave each other hugs. "That's all we wanted," Amara said quietly, "for people to stand together and refuse to be silenced." Carmen Reed arrived with Marcus, who had finally agreed to speak to the DOJ about his own wrongful arrest and thanked the sisters for encouraging him to do so, tears in his eyes as he recalled his missed opportunities. The following day, Jerry McClellan of the Clarion Ledger sent them a thick envelope containing copies of internal police memos and emails that described how some superiors had shielded Walters and Kilroy from suspicious cases, including one that mentioned a plan to target problematic people who spoke out against the department. As Alana read the lines, she cringed at the near miss. Their tale was becoming national, and if they hadn't fought back, they may have been just another statistic buried under false claims. They received a visit from a prominent Jackson civil rights activist who offered them a platform to speak on a larger stage and moral support. Alana and Amara agreed to participate in a panel discussion on policing and systemic racism, and hundreds of people crowded the auditorium as they shared their stories of being strip-searched in a cold-holding cell, volunteering at a youth center, and triumphantly standing in the courtroom where they had just been publicly ridiculed. Even though the topic was heavy, there was a hint of hope in their message. If two Hawthorne City College students can stand up and spark change, imagine what an entire community, an entire nation can do, Amara said, her voice echoing through the microphone. The applause was thunderous. Their sincere faces were captured by flashbulbs, and social media was ablaze with praise for the twins' bravery and tenacity. Offers for nonprofit partnerships, scholarships, and even a possible book deal flooded in. But at their core, Alana and Amara wanted justice, not fame, and they promised to use whatever support and influence they got to help others who were still struggling because of unfair accusations. Months passed, and the daily stress that had once engulfed them gave way to deliberate activity, and their civil case proceeded steadily, with settlement negotiations starting to take shape as the municipal lawyers evidently wanted to avoid a high-profile trial. The public's condemnation of Walters' actions was further cemented when it was revealed that he had fathered a child out of state and used illegal funds from seized property to send hush money to the mother. Meanwhile, Walters and Kilroy rotted in federal custody, waiting for their own day in court, an ironic reversal of their earlier hubris. With every new revelation, the city's tolerance for these disgraced officers dwindled, and it became painfully evident that Alana and Amara's case was only the beginning of a very ugly iceberg. Kilroy, on the other hand, had a lengthy paper trail of racial slurs in emails and text messages, evidence that left no doubt about the racist intent behind his policing tactics. As winter drew near, Alana and Amara stood on their porch, sipping hot cocoa, their breath visible in the crisp air, silently acknowledging the journey they had taken, from the moment they were cornered and arrested to the day the charges were dropped and beyond. The entire apparatus that had previously allowed men like Walters and Kilroy to operate with impunity was now under the microscope, promising a sweeping overhaul. It was a new dawn in Hawthorne City, and the twin sisters were proud to play their part in it. The laughter that had once mocked them in a dark courtroom had vanished, replaced by a resolute chorus of voices demanding real, lasting change. And they felt a wave of gratitude for the outpouring of community and federal support that had ultimately proven their innocence. Alana and Amara's story reminds us that no matter how bleak things may seem, courage, truth, and unity can spark change, even in the face of the deepest injustice. And while the scars of the ordeal would remain, those scars would also serve as a reminder of their strength, of the power that lies in truth, and of the justice that can be achieved when good people refuse to remain silent. Thank you for joining us on this intense and emotional journey, where false accusations gave way to undeniable truths and corrupt officers were finally held accountable for their misdeeds. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel if this story touched you and you support speaking out against corruption. Each click raises awareness and inspires others to speak up when they witness wrongdoing. Let's continue the discussion in the comments section. Together, we can bring attention to injustice and keep promoting reforms that safeguard the innocent and preserve true justice. Tell us what struck you the most, and share your personal stories or ideas about the importance of accountability.